Imagine this. You buy your dream house. You've worked for years, saved every penny, and finally moved into a place you're proud of. But then a group of strangers tells you, sorry, your house isn't the right color. If you don't pay us $100,000, we'll fine you, sue you, and possibly take your home. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me when I went up against my HOA. When I first bought my house, I was beyond thrilled. To be honest, it felt like a dream I wasn't sure I'd ever reach. I'd spent years working overtime shifts, skipping vacations, saving every spare dollar just for this moment. Owning a home wasn't just about walls and a roof to me. It was about security, a place for my family, and the freedom to finally say, this is ours. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, where the mornings were filled with birdsong instead of traffic noise. A wide yard stretched across the front, with a couple of tall oaks shading the driveway. The backyard opened up to a gentle slope, giving us a stunning view of the sunset every evening. I could already picture barbecues in the summer, kids playing tag across the lawn, and maybe even a little garden near the fence line. And the house itself, it was exactly what I'd wanted. The exterior was painted a soft gray, not dull or gloomy, but smooth and welcoming, with crisp white trim that made the windows and porch pop. It looked fresh, clean, and modern, like something out of a home magazine. I couldn't believe this was mine. For the first 2 weeks, everything felt perfect. Every time I pulled into the driveway, I'd get this wave of pride. I'd catch myself pausing by the front steps just to soak it in. Friends came by, neighbors waved hello, and I honestly thought, this is it. I've finally found peace. But peace doesn't last long when you live under an HOA. It started with a simple envelope slipped into my mailbox. No return address, just a stamped logo that said Property Management Association. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a welcome packet, maybe some community rules. But when I tore it open and read the first few lines, my stomach dropped. It said, in stiff legal wording, your home is painted in unapproved colors. You must repaint your property in one of the board-approved shades within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. At first, I actually laughed. Out loud. I thought, this has to be a mistake. The house was freshly painted before I even bought it. The realtor had bragged about how new the paint job was. And it wasn't some wild, neon green nightmare. It was gray. Plain, neutral, professional gray. How could anyone have a problem with that? I folded the letter back up and tossed it on the counter, brushing it off as a clerical error. But something nagged at me. Later that evening, I picked up the letter again and dialed the number listed at the bottom. A woman answered, polite but cold. Hello, this is the Property Management Association. How can I help you? I explained who I was, gave my address, and asked if maybe there had been some mistake. I just moved in, I said, trying to keep my tone light. The house was painted before the sale. Surely this doesn't apply to me. She paused, then in a clipped voice replied, no mistake. Your current colors are not part of the approved palette. You'll need to repaint. I blinked. Repaint? The house is practically brand new. The paint's barely 2 months old. That doesn't matter, she said flatly. It's not about the condition of the paint. It's about compliance with community standards. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe if I sounded casual, she'd soften. Come on, it's just gray and white trim. That's as neutral as it gets. What exactly is wrong with it? There was a pause, and then she replied, it's not about being wrong. It's about not being approved. The board has selected a specific range of shades that maintain community harmony. Yours doesn't match. You'll need to choose one from the list. That's when I felt the first flicker of frustration. Okay, I said carefully. What if I pick one of your approved shades but hire my own painter? That way, it won't cost too much, and everyone's happy. Her tone shifted slightly, almost sharper. No, all repainting must be done by the board's contracted vendor. That ensures quality and uniformity. Now I was annoyed. And how much does this repainting cost? She said it so casually, like it was just another detail. Approximately $100,000. I almost dropped the phone. Wait, what did you just say? $100,000. Payment can be arranged in installments if necessary. I thought I misheard her. Maybe she meant 10,000? But no. She repeated it again slowly, like I was the one who didn't understand English. For a moment, I honestly thought it was a prank. You expect me to pay $100,000 just to repaint a house that's already freshly painted? Are you serious? Yes, sir. If you fail to comply, you will receive a daily fine of $500. Continued noncompliance may result in a lien on your property. I laughed nervously. This has to be a joke. You can't be serious. But she didn't laugh. Not even a little. I assure you, we are serious. You have 60 days to comply. Thank you. And just like that, she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, heart pounding. I looked out the window at my house, the same gray and white home I had fallen in love with just weeks ago. It looked perfect to me. Clean, peaceful, welcoming. And yet, to these people, it was illegal. I thought of the $100,000 price tag. That wasn't repainting. That was extortion. Nobody in their right mind would pay that for a coat of paint. That's the price of a luxury car, or a college degree, or half a house in some states. I picked up the letter again, reading every word carefully. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. And worse, it was backed with threats, fines, liens, even the possibility of losing my home if I didn't obey. That's when the laughter faded, replaced by a slow burn of anger. For days, I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying the phone call in my head, the cold tone of that HOA rep, the smug certainty in her voice. I started asking myself, is this really what I signed up for? Did I just move my family into a nightmare? Friends came over, and I told them the story. They all reacted the same way, shocked, then laughing in disbelief. Man, they can't do that, one friend said. Sounds like a scam, another added. But the laughter never lasted long, because deep down, we all knew HOAs could be brutal. I'd heard horror stories before, fines for having the wrong flowers, penalties for parking in your own driveway, even lawsuits over fence height. And now, here I was, living one of those stories. Every time I pulled into my driveway, that letter flashed in my mind. The house no longer felt like a dream. It felt like a ticking time bomb. Every glance at those gray walls filled me with both pride and dread. And the worst part, my family had no idea how far the HOA could go. Could they actually take our home? Could they ruin us financially over something so petty? That's when I knew. Laughing it off wasn't an option anymore. This wasn't a mistake. This was a fight. The HOA rep didn't bother sugarcoating it. Her voice was flat, almost robotic, as she said, "To meet compliance, you'll need to repaint the entire exterior using our approved contractor." For a second, I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, thinking I must have misheard her. Repaint the entire house? It was already freshly painted. The walls gleamed with newness, the trim still sharp and clean. I could still smell faint traces of paint if I stood close to the siding. I chuckled nervously and asked, "Fine, how much are we talking?" And that's when it hit me like a punch in the chest. $100,000. I nearly dropped the phone. My knees went weak, and I had to sit down at the kitchen table just to steady myself. "Wait," I stammered. "Did you say 100,000? As in 6 zeros?" "Yes," she said calmly, as if she'd just told me the weather forecast. 100,000. Payment arrangements can be made if needed. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that slips out when something is so absurd your brain can't even process it. $100,000 to repaint a house. I said loudly, pacing now. "Do you realize that's more than some people spend on their entire homes?" Her tone didn't change. No sympathy. No sense of reason. Just cold, scripted authority. "These are the board's rules, sir. All exterior repainting must be done by our approved contractor to maintain community standards." I shook my head, gripping the phone tighter. "But the colors I have now are practically identical to the ones on your list. Look at the house. It's soft gray with white trim. Clean, modern, neutral. You can't seriously expect me to believe that's a violation." "It doesn't matter if it's similar," she replied. "It's not exact. and noncompliance has consequences. And then she spelled it out, the threats that turned this from a ridiculous request into a nightmare. If you do not comply within 60 days, she said, you will be fined $500 per day until the property is repainted. After that, if the balance is not resolved, the HOA reserves the right to place a lien on your home. I froze. A lien? For paint? Are you kidding me right now? I asked, voice shaking between anger and disbelief. No, sir. These are the bylaws. They apply to all homeowners equally. Equally? I snapped. So you're telling me every single house in this neighborhood went through your contractor and paid $100,000 to slap on some paint? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, I'm not at liberty to discuss other homeowners' cases. Which told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about rules. This was about money. After she hung up, I sat at the table in silence, staring at the letter. My hands trembled. My chest was tight. $100,000? That was my savings. That was my emergency fund, my kids' college fund, my family safety net. I looked around my kitchen, the house I'd worked years to buy. The walls, the floors, the view out the window of my picture-perfect gray and white exterior. It wasn't just a house. It was my dream. And now, these strangers were telling me that unless I handed over more money than most people earn in a year, they would start bleeding me dry with fines. $500 a day. 30 days in a month. That's $15,000 gone in just 1 month of noncompliance. And then, a lien on my property. They were threatening to take my home away, all over paint colors. When my wife came home, I handed her the letter without saying a word. She skimmed it, frowned, and then her jaw dropped. This is insane, she said. They can't do this. Tell me they can't do this. I rubbed my temples. That's exactly what I thought. But according to them, they can. Her face went pale. 100,000? That's robbery. The house looks fine. It looks better than half the houses on this street. We both went outside and stood in the yard, staring at the house. The gray siding gleamed under the sun. The white trim looked like it had just been painted yesterday. Neighbors walked their dogs, waved, and smiled as they passed. No one seemed offended by the illegal color scheme of our home. And yet, according to the HOA, it was all wrong. That night, I knocked on a few doors, letter in hand. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable the second I mentioned the HOA. A couple admitted they'd been fined before, for things as small as leaving a trash can out too long, or having a flower bed that didn't match the board's vision. One man leaned closer and whispered, "You're not the first they've tried this with. They pick new homeowners because they know you're vulnerable. Most people just cave in because they don't want trouble." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about community standards at all. This was a shakedown, a scam wrapped in official stationery. Over the next few days, I barely slept. I lay awake running numbers in my head. Even if I wanted to, there was no way I could come up with $100,000 in 60 days. Not without draining everything I owned. Not without wrecking my family's future. But ignoring them wasn't an option either. $500 a day would destroy us. And if they put a lien on my home, I could lose everything I'd worked for. I paced the house at night, staring at the walls. Perfect, flawless paint. Nothing wrong with it. And yet somehow, this was about to ruin me. By the end of the week, my fears started to turn into anger. I kept replaying the rep's voice in my head. So casual, so confident. As if she'd said this line to dozens of homeowners before. As if ruining lives was just part of the job. And that smirk I'd seen at the HOA meeting when one board member had told me, "If you can afford the house, you can afford our standards." It made my blood boil. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. And if I didn't push back, they'd keep walking all over me. I sat down with my wife one night, the letter between us on the kitchen table. "I'm not paying it," I said firmly. "I don't care if they fine us. I don't care what threats they make. This is wrong. And if they want to fight, then they're going to get one." She looked at me nervously, but nodded. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, the weight of anger and resolve settling in. "I mean, I'm going to sue them." After that outrageous phone call, I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for the fines to start piling up. I decided I'd go straight to the source, the HOA board itself. Maybe, just maybe, if I explained the situation in person, if they saw I was willing to cooperate, they'd act like reasonable human beings. So when the next HOA meeting rolled around, I showed up early. The meeting was held in a stuffy little community center down the street, a bland beige building with buzzing fluorescent lights and folding chairs lined up in rows. A white plastic table sat at the front of the room where the board members would preside, like kings on their thrones deciding the fate of their subjects. I walked in clutching my folder of documents, photos of my house, proof that it had been freshly painted before I bought it, even a copy of the real estate listing. I thought, if I just show them the evidence, they'll see this as ridiculous. But the moment I walked into that room, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. 5 board members sat at the front, whispering among themselves. A handful of homeowners filled the chairs in the audience, most of them looking down or fiddling with their phones, like they were there out of obligation rather than choice. I sat near the front, heart pounding, waiting for my turn to speak. When they finally called on me, I stood up and introduced myself. My voice shook a little at first, but I steadied it. Hi, I'm the new homeowner at 214 Maple Drive. I recently received a notice regarding the exterior paint colors of my home. I held up the letter, my hand trembling slightly. I want to clarify that the house was freshly painted before I purchased it, in a clean gray with white trim. It's in excellent condition, as you can see from these photos. I passed the pictures down the row, watching as the board members glanced at them with blank expressions. I understand that the community has standards, I continued, trying to sound respectful. I'm not here to argue against the rules. What I am asking for is some common sense. This house looks fine. It matches the neighborhood. But if it's really necessary, I'm willing to repaint it in one of your approved colors. The only thing I ask is that I be allowed to hire my own painter. It'll be more affordable, and the result will be just as good. I paused, expecting some discussion, maybe even nods of agreement. Instead, the room went quiet. Finally, the board president, a man with slick-back gray hair and a sharp suit, cleared his throat. His voice was slow, deliberate, and laced with condescension. "Mr. Johnson," he said, looking at me like a teacher scolding a child, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but the rules are the rules. The approved contractor is mandatory. It ensures quality, uniformity, and accountability." Another board member, a woman with thick glasses and a perpetual scowl, chimed in. Allowing homeowners to pick their own painters would set a dangerous precedent. Before long, people would be cutting corners, and the neighborhood's property values would plummet. I shook my head in disbelief. Cutting corners? I'm literally offering to repaint a house that doesn't even need repainting, just to satisfy your rules. I'm not asking to break standards. I'm asking for a reasonable alternative. That's when it happened. One of the younger board members leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug grin spreading across his face. He didn't even look at the photos. He didn't need to. "If you can afford that house," he said with a smirk, "you can afford our standards." The words hit me like a slap. The room went silent, the kind of silence where everyone knows something ugly has just been said, but no one dares to challenge it. I stared at him, my jaw clenched, my hands tightening around the edge of my folder. My first instinct was to fire back, to demand an explanation. But the smugness on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about paint. In that moment, it all clicked. This wasn't about community harmony, or property values, or aesthetics. No, this was about power. It was about control. And, more than anything else, it was about money. The rules weren't designed to protect the neighborhood. They were designed to profit from it. By forcing homeowners to use their overpriced contractor, they were funneling cash straight into someone's pockets. And the board members, sitting there like judges in a courtroom, were drunk on the authority it gave them. I looked around the room at the other homeowners. Some avoided my gaze. Others gave me sympathetic looks, but stayed silent. That silence spoke volumes. They'd been through this before. They knew the board had the power to make their lives miserable. And so they said nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to hold my composure. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice low but firm. "You're telling me that even though my house is in perfect condition, even though I've offered to repaint it in one of your approved shades, and even though I'd pay for it myself, you're still going to force me to pay $100,000 to use your contractor?" The smirking board member leaned forward. "Exactly." I looked him dead in the eye. "That's not about community standards. That's about greed." The room shifted uncomfortably. A couple of homeowners coughed nervously. The board president tapped his pen against the table. "Meeting adjourned," he announced abruptly, ignoring me completely. "Next order of business." And just like that, they moved on, as if my entire life wasn't hanging in the balance. I walked out of that meeting with my fists clenched, my chest tight. My wife was waiting outside, and when she saw my face, she didn't even need to ask how it went. "They didn't budge, did they?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, they don't care about the house. They don't care about compromise. All they care about is control." She put a hand on my shoulder. "So what now?" I stared back at the glowing windows of the community center, the silhouettes of the board members still visible inside. That smug smirk burned in my memory. "What now?" I said. "Now I fight." That meeting was a turning point for me. Up until then, I thought maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe if I was polite, if I followed the rules, things would work out. But that night I realized the truth. You can't reason with people who don't want reason. You can't compromise with people who thrive on power. The HOA wasn't there to serve the community. It was there to control it, to squeeze money out of the homeowners under the guise of standards. And if I didn't push back, I would be just another victim in their long line of easy paydays. From that night forward, I stopped being afraid. Because when someone shows you who they really are, you have two choices: bow down or stand up. I knew exactly which one I was going to do. I wasn't about to roll over and hand them my life savings. $100,000 for paint? That was more than robbery. It was extortion. Every time I looked at that letter, the threats of fines and liens burned into my mind. And the smirk from that board member at the meeting replayed in my head like a bad movie. I knew one thing for certain. If I wanted to protect my home, I had to fight. And the first step in any fight is understanding your enemy. So I sat down at my kitchen table one Saturday morning, a strong cup of coffee by my side, and opened my laptop. I pulled out the thick packet of HOA bylaws I'd received when I first bought the house. The same packet I'd barely skimmed at the time, thinking it was just standard paperwork. Now, those pages might be the only weapon I had. At first, it was overwhelming. Dozens of pages of legal jargon, written in the driest, most confusing language possible. Paragraph after paragraph of rules about fences, landscaping, roofing materials, mailbox placement. You name it, there was a rule for it. I flipped through the pages until my eyes glazed over, but I forced myself to keep reading. I highlighted sections, scribbled notes in the margins, and cross-reference clauses. If they were going to use these rules against me, then I was going to use the very same rules against them. And slowly, patterns started to emerge. When I reached the section on exterior modifications and maintenance, my heart started racing. This was the section the HOA had cited in their letter, the one they claimed gave them the authority to demand repainting. But as I read line by line, my jaw dropped. It said, "Homeowners must obtain approval from the Architectural Review Committee for any exterior color changes. Approved color palettes will be provided upon request. The committee reserves the right to deny colors deemed inconsistent with community harmony." That was it. No mention of contractors. No mention of mandatory repainting fees. No mention of costs set by the board. I read it again and again. Then I checked the cross-references in the charter. Nothing. The rules gave them the right to approve or deny colors, but not to dictate who painted the house or how much it should cost. That's when the pieces started coming together. The HOA wasn't enforcing community standards. They were exploiting them. They took a vague rule about color approval and twisted it into a money-making scheme by forcing homeowners to use their approved contractor at outrageous prices. I dug deeper, this time into state law. I pulled up articles, legal blogs, even online forums where other homeowners shared horror stories about their HOAs. And there it was, plain as day. In my state, HOAs could regulate the appearance of homes, but they couldn't dictate the method of compliance, especially not by requiring homeowners to hire a specific vendor. This wasn't just unfair. It was illegal. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. The fear that had been choking me. The fear of losing my savings, of drowning in fines, of having a lien slapped on my home, started to lift. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't crazy. They were the ones in the wrong. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the highlighted pages of bylaws scattered across the table. My wife walked into the kitchen and saw me surrounded by papers, my eyes wide with excitement. "What's going on?" she asked cautiously. I pointed at the bylaws. "They can't do this. Look here. Nowhere does it say they can force us to use their contractor. Nowhere does it say they can set the cost. All they can do is approve colors." Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious. They've been lying, intimidating us, using fear to squeeze money out of homeowners. But it's not in the rules. They don't have the authority." For the first time, she smiled. "So what does that mean?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "It means I'm not paying them a dime. It means I'm going to fight back." Of course, part of me still hesitated. HOAs have power, scary power. I'd heard stories of them dragging people through court, bankrupting families, foreclosing on homes over the pettiest violations. What if they twisted the rules again? What if the judge sided with them just because they looked more official? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered that smirk. If you can afford that house, you can afford our standards. That wasn't a rule. That wasn't a law. That was arrogance. And arrogance falls apart when you shine a light on the truth. I spent weeks gathering evidence. I photographed every inch of my house, proving the paint was fresh and professional. I printed copies of the real estate listing that highlighted the new paint job. I highlighted every relevant section of the bylaws and flagged the parts that contradicted the HOA's threats. I even dug through county records, looking for cases where other HOAs had been challenged and won. And sure enough, there were precedents. Other homeowners had stood up against these power-hungry boards, and the courts had sided with them. The more I researched, the stronger I felt. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied, intimidated, or robbed by people hiding behind the letters HOA. One evening, surrounded by stacks of papers, I felt a calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The uncertainty was gone. All that was left was determination. I looked at my wife and said the words I'd been building toward for weeks. "I'm going to fight them." She raised an eyebrow. "Fight them how?" I smiled grimly. "In court." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure about this? Once you go down that road, there's no turning back." "I know," I said, my voice firm. "But they're counting on us being scared. They're counting on us folding. If I let them get away with this, they'll just keep doing it, to me, to us, to every family here. Someone has to stop them, and that someone is going to be me." That night, as I packed up the bylaws and organized my notes, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. The HOA wanted me scared, confused, and helpless. Instead, they had pushed me into action. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd pay up quietly. But they were wrong. This wasn't about paint anymore. It was about principle. It was about standing up when someone tried to abuse their power. And I was ready. The HOA had declared war over the color of my house. But I was going to show them that sometimes, when you push someone too far, they push back harder. I wasn't just going to fight. I was going to win. After weeks of digging, highlighting bylaws, and drowning in legal jargon, I realized something. I couldn't fight this battle alone. The HOA had lawyers, a board full of people who thrived on intimidation, and years of experience bullying homeowners. If I wanted to win, I needed someone who knew their game and could beat them at it. So I made an appointment with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Just finding one took time. Most lawyers didn't want to touch HOA battles because they can drag on for months, even years. But when I explained my situation over the phone, his assistant booked me in right away. Walking into his office, I felt both nervous and hopeful. The walls were lined with law books, framed degrees, and certificates. But what caught my eye was a small plaque on his desk. It read, "Fighting for the little guy." When I handed him the HOA's letter demanding $100,000 for repainting, he raised an eyebrow. $100,000? For paint? He leaned back in his chair, skeptical. That seems exaggerated. I didn't blame him for doubting me. Even when I said the number out loud, it sounded ridiculous. But then I slid over the so-called contractor estimate the HOA had given me. His eyes scanned the paper, his frown deepened, and he let out a low whistle. "This isn't just high," he muttered, tapping the page with his pen. "This is extortion. Plain and simple." For the first time, someone with authority was saying exactly what I had been thinking, and hearing it gave me a surge of confidence. Within a week, we started preparing the case. My lawyer explained a plan clearly, almost like a battle strategy. First, we'd file a lawsuit against the HOA for abuse of power, fraudulent practices, and violation of homeowner rights. He assured me that courts don't look kindly on organizations that overstep their legal boundaries, especially when money is involved. Second, we demand full disclosure of HOA records. That meant every email, every invoice, every communication they'd had about my property. If they were hiding something, discovery would force it into the open. And third, we'd seek damages, not just for me, but to set a precedent that would protect every homeowner in the community from their shady tactics. When I signed the paperwork officially authorizing the lawsuit, I felt a mix of fear and adrenaline. It was real now. I wasn't just talking about fighting back. I was doing it. I expected the lawsuit to just be between me, the HOA, and the court. But word spread quickly. Maybe it was neighbors gossiping. Maybe it was a local reporter who liked HOA horror stories. But soon enough, people started talking. That's when I learned I wasn't the only one. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before came up to me on walks, quietly sharing their own experiences. One woman whispered, "They fined us for having a garden shed, then told us we had to buy a new one from their approved vendor. It cost 3 times what it should have." Another man admitted, "They charged me for unapproved fencing, even though the fence was there before I bought the house." It turned out the board had a pattern, targeting new homeowners, hitting them with outrageous demands, then cashing in when people gave up and paid out of fear. By the time my case was filed, it wasn't just my fight anymore. I had a community behind me. Then came discovery, the stage where both sides have to hand over evidence. Honestly, I thought maybe we'd find sloppy bookkeeping or inflated invoices. But what we uncovered was worse than I could have imagined. Buried in hundreds of emails between board members were messages that exposed everything. One email read, "The new guy seems naive. This could be an easy win for us." Another said, "If we push hard, he'll fold. Paint job estimate is high, but if he wants to avoid fines, he'll pay." And the worst one, it was short, almost casual, like they were joking. "How much do you think we can make off the new guy?" They weren't maintaining the community. They weren't enforcing fair standards. They were treating homeowners like ATM machines. When my lawyer read those emails, he looked at me and said, "We've got them. This isn't just mismanagement, it's fraud." Of course, the board wasn't happy. They tried to spin it. Their lawyer argued the emails were taken out of context. They claimed the $100,000 estimate was just a misunderstanding. They even accused me of being a troublemaker who was disrupting community harmony. But the evidence was overwhelming. No matter how they tried to twist it, the emails spoke for themselves. Their greed was in writing. While all this was happening, my emotions were all over the place. Some nights, I lay awake worrying. What if the judge sided with them? What if they found some loophole I hadn't seen? The thought of losing not just money, but my home haunted me. But other days, I felt unstoppable. Every time I read those emails, every time I remembered that smug board member telling me, "If you can afford the house, you can afford our standards," it fueled me. They thought I was just another homeowner who would cave. But instead, I was the one who had exposed them. Neighbors who had once avoided HOA meetings started showing up. People who'd been silent out of fear now had the courage to speak. One elderly couple even thanked me directly, saying they had been bullied for years, but didn't have the strength to fight back. It was humbling. I had started this battle to save my house, but now it was bigger than me. I was standing up for everyone in the neighborhood who had been pushed around, silenced, or cheated. By the time the court date approached, the HOA's arrogance was crumbling. They had gone from smirking and mocking me to scrambling for excuses. The emails were damning. The inflated contractor estimates were indefensible. And the fact that multiple homeowners had similar stories showed a clear pattern of abuse. What started as them threatening me with fines and liens had now turned into me holding them accountable in front of the law. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to just paying them. How easy it would have been to give in, repaint the house, and swallow the loss. But standing firm, digging into the rules, hiring a lawyer, and filing the lawsuit had turned the tables completely. The HOA wanted to make an example out of me. Instead, I became the example of what happens when you fight back. And the best part? We weren't even at trial yet. The biggest blow to their empire was still to come. The day of the trial finally arrived, and I'll never forget the atmosphere in that courtroom. The air felt heavy, like everyone knew something big was about to happen. My palms were sweating as I sat beside my attorney, stacks of binders and evidence laid neatly in front of us. On the other side of the room sat the HOA board members, dressed in expensive suits, their expressions cold and smug. They whispered to one another like they had already won. Behind them, their high-powered lawyers looked polished and confident, like sharks circling in the water. But I kept reminding myself, evidence doesn't lie. When the HOA's attorney stood up to speak, he did what I expected. He painted me as a reckless homeowner who didn't respect community rules. He said I was trying to undermine harmony and set a dangerous precedent. He waved around the bylaws, twisting the language to make it seem like the board had absolute power over every inch of our homes. And as he spoke, the board members nodded in unison, arms crossed like they were untouchable. At one point, their lawyer even said, if every homeowner was allowed to question the HOA, chaos would follow. That's why this board exists, to maintain order. I almost laughed. Order? They weren't maintaining order. They were profiting from fear. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood up, calm and collected. He didn't waste words. He laid out the facts. The bylaws gave the HOA the right to approve or deny paint colors. Nowhere did it say they could demand homeowners hire a specific contractor. Nowhere did it say they could set the cost of repairs or renovations. Then he dropped the bombshell, the emails. The judge leaned forward as my lawyer handed copies of the emails to the clerk. And then, in a voice that carried across the silent courtroom, the judge began to read them aloud. The new guy seems naive. This could be an easy win for us. You could feel the room shift. People in the audience turned to each other, whispering. Then came the second one. If we push hard, he'll fold. Paint job estimate is high, but if he wants to avoid fines, he'll pay. The smug expressions on the board members' faces began to falter. And finally, the worst one. How much do you think we can make off the new guy? The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The judge lowered the paper slowly, his eyes narrowing at the board members. That was the moment the tide turned completely. The judge's voice was sharp, deliberate, and carried authority. This court is appalled by the conduct revealed in these communications. Homeowners associations are established to protect communities, not to exploit them. What I see here is a blatant abuse of power, a disregard for the bylaws, and frankly, an attempt to commit fraud. The HOA's lawyer tried to interject, stammering about context and misinterpretations. But the judge wasn't having it. Context, the judge snapped. The context is clear. You saw homeowners not as neighbors, not as community members, but as opportunities for profit. That is unacceptable. When the ruling came down, it was more than I ever hoped for. First, the judge ruled that the $100,000 demand for repainting was unlawful and had no basis in the bylaws or state law. My home was in compliance, and I was under no obligation to repaint. Second, the judge went beyond just my case. He ordered the HOA to refund every homeowner who had been charged fines or forced into overpriced repairs through similar schemes. The court recognized this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of corruption. Third, the judge delivered the hammer blow. The current HOA board was to be dissolved immediately, until a fair election could be held. An independent trustee would oversee the HOA's operations to ensure transparency. And finally, the part that made me smile the most, the HOA was ordered to pay all of my legal fees. Every single penny. The board members sat frozen, their faces pale. The smug confidence they'd carried into the courtroom had evaporated. Some of them avoided eye contact, others whispered frantically to their lawyers, but it didn't matter. The ruling was final. Behind me, I heard quiet cheers and murmurs from neighbors who had come to watch. People who had once been too afraid to speak against the HOA were now smiling, whispering things like, "Finally, and justice." I glanced at my wife, who had tears in her eyes. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did it." And for the first time in months, I felt the crushing weight of stress lift from my shoulders. News of the ruling spread like wildfire through the community. Within days, homeowners who had been bullied, fined, or scammed by the board were coming forward, demanding refunds and getting them. For years, people had felt powerless against the HOA. But now, the balance of power had shifted. Neighbors who barely spoke to one another before began to unite. Meetings were filled with real discussions about how to make the neighborhood better, not how to squeeze more money out of families. And as for me, I went back to living my life, sitting on my porch, enjoying the view, and finally feeling at peace in the home I had worked so hard for. But the sweetest part, the one that still makes me smile when I think about it, was this. Every time I walked past the former board president, the one who had smirked and told me, "If you can afford that house, you can afford our standards," I remembered the judge's ruling. Not only had they lost, not only had their little empire crumbled, but they were forced to pay my lawyer's bills. The same money they had tried to take from me ended up funding the very case that brought them down. Karma doesn't usually arrive in such a clear package, but in this case, it was gift-wrapped. At the end of the day, this story wasn't just about paint, or fines, or even an HOA. It was about power. When people in authority think they can bully others, they'll keep pushing, until someone pushes back. I learned that no matter how intimidating they seem, HOAs are not above the law. And when you stand your ground, when you do your homework, when you refuse to be silenced, you can win, even against a system designed to scare you into submission. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless against unfair rules, remember this. Bullies only win when you stay quiet. And sometimes, the best victory isn't just saving your home. It's making the bullies pay for every step of the fight.